In this video I'm going to show the basic steps for making a keepsake box. I'm starting with a 4.5 inch wide by 3/4 inch actual piece of pine, and I'm going to cut it to 26 inches in length while my radial arms are. Next I'm going to resaw this board. I'm going to resaw it to give me a 1/2 inch on one side, and then the other side I'll use for the top and the bottom. So let me mark it at the 1/2 inch point. And then I'll go over to the bandsaw and then resaw it down that line. I like to store these at the binder clip, and then I can label each one. I'm going to put on this big Olsen 5/8 3/10 per inch. I have my bandsaw blade lined up for the cut. I have my feather board in position, and I'm ready to make the cut. I'm going to be making a through mortise for the hinge. That means that the width of the board has to equal the hinge width. The easiest way to do that for sanding is I'm just going to hold the hinge up and mark it along that line. Slide it up and down the board. Now I'll go to my drum sander, and I'll just sand off this piece over here. Then I'll have a piece perfectly positioned to put the hinge on. Next I'm going to pass the thin board through the sander. The next step is to cut the thicker piece of wood using our layout for the box. Now you see that there's kind of an ugly section down here, so when I square off this board I want to make sure I cut out that ugly section. Once I square off this end, then I can begin to make the rest of the cuts. Okay, that was the last piece. Here are the pieces laid out: left, front, right, and back, with the grain matching at the 3 corners. The next step is to cut the slots for the top lid and the bottom lid, and after that we can cut the miters. I've adjusted the router bit height to about 1/8 inch in order to make the groove for the top and the bottom panel. We're going to make the groove about 1/4 inch down from both sides, so it'll run across the back of each of the pieces. Make sure when you route, you're routing the back and not the front piece. In preparation for doing the miters, it's very important to mark the miter on each corner. And so I'll go ahead and I'll do that. It's very easy to get confused once you start cutting these. I'm going to be using this jig I built. It's a 45-degree jig. I use it to cut the miters. I basically have my fence positioned here. Put the jig up against the fence. Adjust the fence so that the jig sits right flush with the face of the blade. To use the jig, I'm going to slide my piece of wood straight down the face of the jig until it bottoms out on the table. Make sure it's oriented correctly. Push down on the clamp, and then when you're finished cutting the miters, put them face to face and make sure that they are exactly the same length. Now I need to cut the top panel to fit into the dado. The easiest way to get that measurement is to slide the top panel in to the slot and then make a mark on the other side where it'll fit nicely, not too big so that it pushes on the right or left panels, and not too short that you see a reveal. I've cut the top and bottom panels to size. The next thing to do is a dry assembly to make sure everything fits right, and then after that we can glue it. The next step is to take each of the pieces, left, front, right, back, make sure the grain matches, put it against a straight edge, and then take this blue stretch tape, which is just your normal 3M tape, and put it tape across the joints. You want to make sure that the joints are tight against each other. When you do this, you don't want to go crazy and overstretch the tape onto the joint. Just make sure that all the wood is against a straight edge and that you have a reasonably tight tape joint. In other words, when you let go, you shouldn't find that the wood buckles at all under the stress of the tape. Some people like to use clear packaging tape here. The advantage is you can see straight through into the joint. I find sometimes though when I take that packaging tape off, it lifts off some of the wood with it. That's why I tend to stick with this blue tape. Now that that is done, you flip it over, clean out the joints if there's any wood in there. Put in our top and our bottom. Let's see, like that. Roll the sides up. Like this. And then make sure everything fits okay. If it doesn't, you can go back and adjust the size of the top or bottom lid. It looks like this is fitting fairly well. All right, we will unravel this, put glue in the miters, put rubber bands around it, and let it sit overnight. I'm going to use Type Bond 2 glue and these Rockler silicone accessories for gluing. I really like this brush in particular. So we have our layout down here. Flip it over. And we'll start applying glue to that miter joint. Some people apply glue to one side. I tend to apply it to both sides. Maybe a little bit sloppier than I should be here just to kind of rush through things. You don't want to put so much glue in here that you get squeezed out on the inside of the box, because the way we're assembling it, you're not going to be able to get to the inside of the box to wipe off that excess. That's why some people actually only put the glue down deep into the miter, and they starve the joint on the inside of the miter, realizing that when they close it, they're going to get some glue in there. And that's just kind of due to paranoia of not getting squeezed out on the inside. Don't forget to do the outside miter, because that's going to get wrapped around. And then put glue in the middle section of this floating panel. That way it won't rattle too much. If I were doing this for good, I would probably take a piece of blue tape, twist it up and roll it up into a long cylindrical piece, jam that as sort of a jam joint into the long edge here so you don't get any rattle. But for now, I'm just kind of zipping along here. See if I can remember which side is. Now we do a roll up. It's always good to make sure that the box is square. An easy way to do that is to measure one diagonal. That is 8 inches. And this diagonal, which is 8 inches. So we're in good shape as far as keeping the box square, but a large part of keeping it square has to do with the fact that these top and bottom panels are in there, and that really helps to square things up during the glue up. All right, we'll let that sit overnight and then cut off the top tomorrow. Maybe put some hinges on and then be done. The glue is dried overnight. Now it's time to take the rubber bands off and see what we got. Okay, I can see these need a little bit of touch-up, so we're going to touch up the miters using a desktop belt sander. And you can see that there's a little bit of an overlap here. That little bit of sanding really has cleaned up the joints. You can see on the face the joints now look pretty good, and the miters on the corner are closed like they should be, and we have a nice grain match. Although these miters look pretty good, the easy way to take care of any gaps on the end there is to take a screwdriver that has a round shank and then to lightly roll that shank against the edge, and you can actually close up that miter pretty easily. Next step then is to cut the lid off at the table saw. When I cut the lid on the table saw, I want to leave just a whisker of hair left to hold the lid and the carcass together, and then I'll take a knife and cut that to completely separate the lid from the carcass. I'll adjust the height of the blade to be just under the wall thickness. I've adjusted the fence to give me about a 1-inch lid. Okay, now I'll take a sharp knife or scalpel and just cut off that little bit of a whisker of a hair. Now I'll just remove that little edge there. A little bit of sandpaper or a chisel should do it. For the through mortise, I need to change my bit to this bit here, and I'll just take multiple passes to make sure I have the right setting for the router bit. I'm going to take a scrap piece of wood and make sure I have the right depth to fit the hinge as well as the right width. After that, I can begin to cut the mortises for the hinge. Now, I got the test piece length correct because I can put the hinge in there and then hold it up, and it's tight enough that it'll just stay in there, which is exactly what we want. Now I need to check whether the depth of the cut is correct. So I made 2 cuts, put them end on end like that, and you know that you have the correct hole thickness there. In other words, the depth of the cut is when you can take the hinge and slide it in there, and it looks like I have to go a little bit deeper on my cut. I can't quite fit the hinge in there. I can put a feeler gauge in there and I can see that I'm about 20 thousandths off, so let me make that adjustment on the router bit height. Since I'm off by 20 thousandths in that measurement, I have to raise the router bit 10 thousandths, since there's 10 thousandths on either side of the gap. Okay, the test cut looks great. Okay, we're ready to cut the mortises. I've added a little scrap piece of wood here so I don't get blowout as I cut the mortise. I noticed that I got some glue on the inside of the box. So what I'm going to do is take some hot water. I boiled this in the microwave. Take a little bit of a cloth and then just remove that glue. I put a little bit of cloth on the end of the tweezers. I'll dip that into the hot water and then work it back and forth over that glue to soften it. Once the glue is soft, you can take a scalpel and very gently remove that softened glue. So you can see there's a piece that's come out. If you're going to use a scalpel, you must wear safety glasses because these tips will break off and go flying. You can get the majority of the glue out of a joint just by being patient. The key is to let that water soak in and let it do the work for you. Then use the scalpel to slowly work your way in there. Using a head magnifier also helps. Of course, the best of all situations is not to overdo it on the glue joint so you don't get squeezed out on the inside. I'm getting ready to install the hinges. I've used the stack of boards to prop up the lid so that it is at the same height as the carcass. Then I'll place the hinges into position. Once the hinges are in there temporarily, you can flip the lid up, check the fit. If it looks good, we can begin to drill the holes. Okay, I can see that this is offset here, so I need to go back and adjust the hinge until it's perfect. To drill the holes, I use a 5/64 snappy bit, which is like a Vicks bit. Position it over the hole in the hinge and then just drill down. When you're making the holes for the lid, make sure you don't drill straight through the lid. I'm going to drill 2 holes in each hinge rather than the 4 holes in each hinge. After I get the 2 holes in, I'll check for a fit. If everything looks good, I'll drill the remaining holes and tighten everything down. Here you can see one of the holes. I'm going to take the screw that's very tiny, put a lot of this screw wax on it, screw it a little bit into the hole, back it out, screw it a little more, back it out. As soon as I get any sort of resistance, I back it out. By working the screw in that way, you can guarantee pretty much that you're not going to snap the head off of it. So I'm just going in and out, in and out. It's a very smooth operation with that wax. There. You don't want to over tighten it. If you happen to strip a screw, you just put some CA glue in there and keep on moving. I checked the fit and it looks good. I'll drill the remaining 4 holes and put the screws in. If you want to make a nice box, you might as well line up the screws so they all line up in the same direction. It just makes a nice uniform touch and flow to the box. The carcass of the box sits a little bit proud of the lid. My fingernail can feel it in there. So I'm going to take it over to the sander and just make that side flush. Then I might as well do the other sides also. I normally finish my work with Danish oil, so I used Watco Danish oil. Basically, you slop that onto the wood. You can do that with a brush. I guess you can dip it. You can use a towel, put it on. And you keep on putting it on until it no longer absorbs. I normally wait a couple of minutes until I'm pretty sure that it hasn't absorbed anymore. Then I'll take sandpaper while it's still wet, sand it, and it forms a slurry. Then I'll wipe it off. I'll wait a day, go to the next level of sandpaper, do the exact same thing. Over a period of 4 days, I can work myself through, say, 180, 220, 320, 400 grits. After that, let it dry a week, put some paste wax on, and call it quits. The Watco Danish oil can be highly flammable on a rag when it's dry. So I take a container like that, fill it with water, and then whenever I am done using an oily rag, I put it immediately into the water, and that way I'm guaranteed it won't catch fire on me. I always make sure to wear a respirator when I apply finish, particularly for Danish oil. For some reason my nose is very sensitive to the smell, so I wear this respirator. Alright, I've been slapping this on for the last couple of minutes, and the first coat always absorbs a lot, so I've been reapplying every time I see a dry spot. I want to put just a little bit more on and then start wet sanding with 150 grit. Getting a little dry. Nothing fancy about this. Okay, I've been wet sanding for a couple of minutes. The idea here is that slurry that you're building up should be forced into the pores, trying to make a fairly smooth surface. Again, nothing fancy or rocket science about this, but the problem is it's going to take me 4 days. Granted, it's only 15 minutes per day, but yet 4 days to finish this piece from the oil point of view, and then another week or preferably 2 weeks for it to dry before I can add the paste wax. Anyhow, that's the 150 grit. Tomorrow I'll do 220 and then 320, 400, and then let it sit. Oh, I forgot to mention that after you wet sand, you have to take a dry towel and then you wipe off all of that slurry. And then come back after about an hour and you look at the box in the light, and if you see any oil weeping back out on the pores, you wipe it off. You never want to let that oil sit overnight, because the next morning it'll form this gooey mass which you'll have to take mineral spirits to remove. So make sure after an hour or two to check. You want to wipe off any of that oil that seeps out, particularly before you go to bed. Make sure that there's nothing on the surface, because then overnight it'll congeal and you'll have a hard time. I've done the first application and sanding of the Danish oil. So I'm going to take my sandpaper and any rags that I've used both for applying and for drying that oil, and stick it in my little bucket of water there. I even take the paper towels that I clean my hands off with. I throw those in the water too. Better to be safe than sorry, I suppose. Well, thanks for watching the video. I hope all the NTWA guys go out in their garage and begin to make boxes. It's been fun. Thanks a lot. Bye.